Her essence resides within you. Even if geographical oceans divide you, even if her physical form is no longer present, even if decades have passed since your last word, her influence persists, not merely as a memory but woven into the very fabric of your inner world. Carl Jung illuminated this profound force, perhaps the most feared, yet the most foundational, the mother complex. It is not solely about the external woman, but rather the internal image, the emotional blueprint she imprinted upon your soul. An unseen power shaping your path, your expression, your connections, and the narrative you hold about yourself. This is what Jung termed the shadow mother. Not the comforting presence you once knew, but the psychological residue of unmet needs, unspoken expectations, and inherited suffering. And here lies the challenging truth. You cannot achieve true healing until you confront her, not the physical mother, but the one who still dwells within you. For many, this internal terrain is both sacred and terrifying. Jung noted that nothing impacts a person psychologically more strongly, especially their children, than the unlived life of a parent. When you absorb your mother's sorrow, her shame, her silences, her pain, you become entwined in an existence that is not authentically yours. You start to function as her reflection, her guardian, her extension, and your own inner light begins to fade. This isn't about assigning blame. It is an invitation to return to your own self, to reclaim the aspects of you that were never nurtured, to honor the grief your inner child was forbidden to feel, to release the weight you were never intended to carry. In this exploration, we are not casting accusations. We are igniting beacons in the soul's deepest corners, because genuine freedom arises not from resenting the mother, but from consciously engaging with the mother within. In this journey, we will explore the profound depths of your psyche, beyond surface-level heartache, beyond the ego's defenses, into the alchemical process of death and rebirth that begins the instant you finally decide to let her go. You will understand why your journey toward healing has stalled, how this deep mother wound has shaped your identity, and how Jung's powerful insights offer a pathway not just to endurance, but to sovereignty. The reality is straightforward, though not easy. You have permission to step out of the child's role. You have permission to stop carrying sorrow that is not your own. You have permission to rewrite your own story. And it begins with one act of profound courage, facing the mother within your mind. The mother archetype and its paradox in the intricate landscape of Jungian psychology. The representation of the mother transcends the individual woman who bore us. She occupies a primal position within the framework of the collective unconscious, a timeless, universal image that exists beyond personal history, embedded deeply within the shared human psyche. For Jung, the mother is fundamentally an archetype, a universal psychic pattern we are born with, not one we invent. It appears time and again in our dreams, in ancient myths, and within the dynamics of our personal connections. She is more than just a private figure. She is eternal. The mother archetype carries a potent duality. She is both the source of life and the force that consumes it, the one who nurtures and the one who smothers. This is what Jung identified as the paradox of the Great Mother. It is an image far older than any civilization, embodying simultaneously safety and peril, creation and annihilation, comfort and engulfment. This powerful archetype is not defined or limited by the specific history or identity of your biological mother. It lives beneath that personal layer. We see it surface in sacred icons, in the symbols of nature, within the narratives of mythology, and even in the very earth itself. The mother archetype is the one who provides sustenance, and she is also the one who threatens to absorb or destroy. For those who carry unresolved pain originating from their personal mothers, this potent archetype becomes deeply interwoven with that individual trauma. Jung warned that when we fail to distinguish the personal mother from this vast archetypal mother, we become ensnared in a psychological maze. We find ourselves unconsciously repeating the hurts of childhood in our adult relationships, desperately yearning for care and validation, yet simultaneously terrified of true intimacy, constantly seeking acceptance while recoiling in fear of rejection. The archetype, when fractured and not integrated consciously, gives rise to psychological distortions. In our dreams, she might manifest as a benevolent guardian or a horrifying figure that devours. In mythological tales, she is depicted as figures like Demeter and Persephone, or Mary and Medea. Jung described this profound ambiguity as the bipolar nature of the mother archetype, encompassing good and evil, creator and destroyer, the holy and the profane. When the psyche becomes fixated on one extreme while denying the other, we become psychologically fragmented. To idolize the mother is to deny her shadow aspects. To demonize her is to reject her inherent light. In either scenario, we fall into the pattern of projection, unconsciously casting our own unacknowledged inner wounds onto partners, mentors, superiors, spiritual teachers, or anyone who carries that symbolic maternal weight. And this, as Jung observed, is precisely why so many people remain psychologically stuck, because genuine healing of the mother wound is not a surface-level process. The internal mother. Within the intricate architecture of your inner landscape, a powerful psychic presence often operates with unsettling quietness. This is the internal mother. She may not make a sound, but she dictates. She may not use force, yet she molds. Carl Jung described this inner figure as the internalized mother imago, a psychological reflection of maternal influence embedded so profoundly in the unconscious that it frequently eludes conscious awareness for an entire lifetime. Even when the physical mother is no longer present, through passing, distance, or estrangement, the internal mother endures. She is not merely a memory, but a dynamic, self-governing complex, quietly shaping your thoughts, emotions, choices, and how you connect with others. She becomes the unseen ruler of your inner world, whispering into the adult soul the narratives the child once absorbed unquestioningly. From our very first breath, the mother, or the one in her stead, served as the mirror reflecting our initial sense of self. Her look, her tone, her touch, or her withdrawal taught us if we were welcomed into the world or merely tolerated. Jung posited that these foundational impressions are not just stored as data, they are mythologized within the soul, solidifying into what he termed the mother complex. This psychic structure evolves into the mother imago, a potent symbolic image charged with emotional weight, meaning, and mythic significance. The profound tragedy here is that the imago is seldom an accurate depiction. It represents the mother not as she truly was, but as she was perceived through the eyes of an undeveloped psyche, desperately seeking survival. If the internal mother was a source of consistent nurturing in attunement, she develops into an inner wellspring of self-worth and security. But if she was distant, rejecting, critical, or overly entwined, she transforms into a silent saboteur, an unseen force that subtly influences every connection, every risk taken, every aspiration. Her internal voice might softly suggest, "You are too much. You are not enough. Stay quiet. Don't shine. Remain small. Stay safe." Jung warned that mistaking this voice for your true self leads to psychological enslavement to a phantom. You confuse inherited programming with your inherent truth. This is precisely where the inner saboteur is born, not from simple insecurity, but from the internalized critique of a mother who may have conditioned approval or used affection transactionally. This inner mother figure can manifest psychically as an echo of disapproval, an impulse to forsake yourself to please others, or a subtle wave of panic whenever you dare to break free from ingrained roles. Her voice surfaces during moments of potential growth, acting like a hand pulling you back into the familiar confinement of self-doubt. When this inner figure remains unconscious, Jung explained, she is unconsciously projected onto others, partners, mentors, superiors, friends. Suddenly, you are no longer seeing individuals as they are, but through the emotionally charged filter of your unresolved maternal longing. You burden them with the expectation of healing wounds they did not inflict. You react to them with disproportionate fear, neediness, or anger. You pursue the fantasy of being chosen, cared for, or affirmed, while inadvertently attracting individuals who mirror the very emotional dynamics you are trying to escape. The unintegrated negative internal mother becomes a distorted lens on reality, leading to confusion, disappointment, and emotional repetition. In its most damaging form, the internal mother functions as a psychic vampire, not literally but energetically. She depletes your vitality, suppresses your natural instincts, and dims your creative flame. This can appear as persistent fatigue, emotional numbness, a reluctance to make bold choices, or an inability to make decisions without experiencing guilt. You feel psychologically frozen, existing yet disconnected from life. Jung saw this as a form of psychological possession, an inner colonization where the soul is no longer autonomous, but ruled by a static image from the past. And yet, paradoxically, a deep loyalty to her persists, even if she caused pain, even if she was emotionally cold or harsh. The psyche clings to this image, perhaps hoping that by remaining small enough, compliant enough, wounded enough, you might finally gain her affection. But Jung deemed this a tragic delusion. The internal mother is not evolving. She is not real in a dynamic sense. She is a fixed psychic imprint. No amount of self-contortion to win her favor will succeed. You will only sink deeper into self-abandonment. To truly heal, Jung insisted, requires initiating a conscious separation, not from your biological mother, but from the inner image that holds your soul captive. This necessitates recognizing the mother complex for what it is. It demands confronting the inner figure directly through methods like active imagination, inner dialogue, dream work, and symbolic rituals. It compels you to allow the exiled feelings to surface, the rage, the grief, the sense of betrayal, the longing. It is an invitation to reclaim the voice you suppressed, the boundaries you feared to establish, the power you once relinquished just to survive. This separation is not an act of defiance. It is individuation, the sacred right to exist as a distinct self, not merely a shadow. However, disarming the shadow is insufficient. Jung believed you must also reclaim the light, the positive face of the mother archetype, the inner nurturer, the protector, the creative force. This does not arise from fantasy or denial. It comes from cultivating a new internal relationship, one rooted not in scarcity but in sovereignty. Through practices of kind self-talk, personal rituals of care, connection to mythic feminine symbols, and engaging in creative and embodiment practices, you gradually begin to mother yourself. In doing so, you reclaim the parts of your psyche once banished in the name of survival. Jung wrote, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." In the realm of the mother complex, that darkness resides in the internal mother, the silent commander, the inherited voice, the ancestral wound. Until you confront her not with hostility but with clear awareness, you remain tethered. But once you do, you step into something sacred. You begin to live not as a child seeking permission, but as an adult who carries within both the strength and the tenderness of the healed feminine. You no longer wait to be chosen, you choose. You no longer plead for love, you love yourself into wholeness. And in that profound act, the spell of the inner mother begins to dissolve, and a deeper self begins to emerge. The sacred separation. Individuation from the mother complex. Carl Jung articulated that one of life's most sacred yet painful psychological passages is the symbolic separation from the mother complex. This isn't about rejecting the physical mother, but rather confronting the profound archetypal gravity that seeks to pull the ego back into states of merger, reliance, and unconscious adherence. Without accomplishing this separation, Jung cautioned, there can be no true individuation, no authentic sense of I, no fully awakened existence. This undertaking is less a social event and more a profound psychic rite, a process of psychological death and subsequent rebirth, often hidden beneath the surface struggles adults face with establishing boundaries, defining identity, and discovering purpose. To remain entangled with the inner mother Imago, whether driven by guilt, fantasy, or unconscious fear, is to live veiled, operating not from genuine self-possession, but from inherited roles. The compliant child, the silent appeaser, the internal orphan perpetually awaiting recognition. Jung likened this inner uncoupling to a second birth. The first liberates the physical body, the second liberates the soul. It is through this arduous process of detachment that the adult self begins its ascent, not in an act of rebellion, but in reverence for its own necessary evolution. Yet many resist this essential rite. The separation, despite its necessity, is met with profound terror. Jung identified the forces that hold us bound, the fear of annihilation, the primal childlike terror that severing the connection means death, the guilt of betrayal, a psychic conviction that becoming an independent individual is an act of ingratitude towards the one who gave life, the comfort of familiarity, where even suffocation feels safer than the uncertainty of freedom, and the cultural structures that prioritize familial loyalty above inner authenticity. Jung stressed these are not mere neuroses, but ancient archetypal currents within the collective unconscious, forces every human must confront to achieve wholeness. When this separation is avoided, the consequences are significant. The child archetype takes control of the adult ego. Beneath the veneer of polished lives and high-functioning roles lies an inner child, unseen and unhealed, still pleading for permission to be real. Such individuals inhabit adult bodies but cannot claim their own inner authority. They hesitate before action, defer decisions, suppress desires, and fear failure not for its external consequences, but for what it might signify to the lingering mother image in their minds. In Jung's view, this isn't immaturity, it's a state of psychic captivity. True separation embodies the hero's journey. It involves descending into the unconscious forest, confronting the dragon of the mother's shadow, the protector who became a jailer, the giver who became a devourer. The path is marked by grief, confusion, rage, and the aching silence of ancestral memory. But to decline this calling is to live a life dictated not by the soul, but by avoidance. The one who postpones this journey risks existential despair, unconsciously repeating the unresolved drama of the mother complex in every relationship, every job, every unfulfilled desire. The ego must undergo a form of death for the authentic self to emerge. Jung described this moment as a psychological crucifixion, the demise of the compliant child, the one who believed love could only be earned through suppression. From this, the sovereign adult is born, not refined or perfect, but grounded, breathing, willing to meet life as it is. This birth, like all births, is chaotic. It necessitates mourning for the childhood that never was, the illusions now shattered, and the deep longing that must now be faced rather than merely satisfied. Yet following death comes emptiness, a silence so vast it can be terrifying. The void, Jung wrote, is sacred space. It is the vacuum remaining when the mother's voice no longer occupies the psyche, and it becomes perilous only if we fail to fill it ourselves. If we do not claim this space with our own values, desires, and inner voice, the mother's shadow returns, stronger, subtler, and more consuming. This underscores why separation alone is insufficient. It must be followed by creation, the construction of a new inner structure, neither borrowed nor inherited, but forged from self-awareness. When this happens, when the individual steps across this threshold, the sovereign ego begins to awaken. This is not the inflated ego of superiority, but the stable ego founded on self-trust. It is the kind that no longer acts primarily to please or perform, but to express the truth of its own being. It makes decisions not out of fear or guilt, but from inner alignment. It enters relationships not seeking salvation, but desiring to share. This ego doesn't demand certainty, it embraces mystery. It doesn't require applause, it honors its own voice. Underpinning this process is a spiritual truth. Jung viewed the breaking away from the mother complex as more than psychological. It is the moment we step out of the known world, the mother as collective, the mother as safety, and step into the wild, sacred territory of the self. The self is not merely the ego's fantasy, but the deep inner guide, the force carrying our inherent blueprint and daring us to fulfill it. When we separate from the mother complex, we are not turning away from love, we are turning toward truth. And in doing so, we begin to live not as followers of scripts, but as co-creators of meaning. Ritual facilitates this unfolding. Jung understood that significant thresholds must be marked. Whether through art, dream work, journaling, or sacred symbolic gestures, we give form to the formless. We declare, the old is over. We speak to the mother in our minds and state, I honor you, but I no longer belong to you, I belong to myself. We construct altars, not of stone, but of courage, acts of boundary setting, moments of honesty, breaths taken without fear of punishment. Separation, then, is not betrayal. It is a devotion to life. It is the act of becoming a vessel spacious enough to contain both the grief of the past and the beauty of what is yet to come. Without it, we merely circle the same shadows. With it, we commence the journey toward the self. As Jung once remarked, man's task is to become conscious of the contents that press upward from the unconscious. In the labyrinth of the mother complex, the first doorway opens through the brave, beautiful act of letting go. Unhealed mother wound. Symptoms and messages. Carl Jung taught that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This principle is especially evident in the effects of an unhealed mother wound. When the mother complex remains dormant and unexamined, it does not vanish. Instead, it weaves itself through the psyche and subtly shapes beliefs, behaviors, emotions, and relationships. These are not random issues, but rather archetypal patterns, manifestations of unresolved energies that have not yet been brought into conscious awareness. The following are 9 deeply rooted psychic symptoms that can reveal the presence of an unhealed mother wound. 1. The inner critic and chronic self-doubt. A persistent inner voice undermines you, whispering, "You're not good enough," or "Who do you think you are?" This is not just ordinary self-doubt. It is the internalized shadow of the maternal voice, an echo of early experiences where love may have been conditional, approval withheld, or vulnerability punished. This voice, often disguised as logic or morality, punishes the ego and hinders the development of the authentic self. Jung described this as a complex, an autonomous fragment of the psyche that acts like a parasite feeding off the ego's attempts to grow. 2. Fear of autonomy and clinging to dependence. Individuals carrying this wound often feel conflicted, yearning for freedom but terrified of it. They desire independence but become paralyzed when faced with standing alone. Decisions seem dangerous, success feels like betrayal, and failure becomes a means to maintain an invisible loyalty to the suffering inner mother image. Jung saw this dynamic as a regression back into the archetypal mother's protective, though potentially suffocating, embrace, where safety is gained at the expense of the self. 3. Guilt, shame, and the inherited burden. A deep, almost sacred sense of guilt is common in those who attempt to separate from the mother complex. It manifests as the belief, if I thrive, I betray her. If I grow, I abandon her. This is not personal guilt, but archetypal guilt, rooted in the primitive conviction that one's survival is tied to the mother's emotional state. Jung identified this as the child unconsciously carrying the unlived life of the parent, passing down the mother's regrets, limitations, and pain like emotional DNA. 4. The pattern of self-abandonment and people-pleasing. Those wounded by maternal disapproval or conditional love often become skilled in self-abandonment. The ego, still programmed to appease, sacrifices its own needs to remain perceived as good, lovable, or accepted. Setting boundaries feels threatening, and saying no triggers shame. Jung interpreted this as the ego continuing to wear the mask of the obedient child, fearing the wrath of the inner mother and being unfamiliar with the inherent authority of its own voice. 5. Attracting relationships that reenact the wound. Perhaps most painfully, Individuals are often drawn to partners who emotionally mirror the mother wound. Being distant, critical, controlling, or smothering. This repetition is not foolishness. It is the psyche's symbolic effort to repair the original trauma. Jung noted that the unconscious recreates unresolved trauma externally, not as punishment, but with the intention of healing. However, without awareness of this projection, individuals mistake this repetition for fate and wrongly perceive the suffering as love. 6. The core wound of not enoughness. I am not enough becomes a constant background hum in the soul, an inner decree often inherited from a mother's neglect, absence, or unreachable standards. This belief manifests as perfectionism, overachievement, shame, and an inability to experience joy without feeling the need to apologize for it. Jung recognized this as the cry of the inner child, still waiting to be seen and touched by the warmth it lacked. 7. Suppression of creativity and fear of expression. The mother archetype embodies not only nurturing, but also creativity. When this archetype is wounded within the psyche, creativity feels dangerous and expression feels unsafe. The individual becomes paralyzed, fearing their gifts will be judged, their voice silenced, or their light rejected. Jung taught that when the devouring mother archetype dominates the psyche, the individual unconsciously fears that shining their light will provoke abandonment or even retaliation. 8. Somatic symptoms in the body's cry for healing. What the mind represses, the body expresses. Jung observed that unresolved complexes frequently show up as physical symptoms, such as fatigue, anxiety, autoimmune disorders, and eating issues, which reflect the inner conflict between being nurtured and being consumed. These are not random physical problems, but the body's symbolic language, pleading for reconciliation between the wounded ego and the forgotten inner child. 9. Spiritual alienation and existential emptiness. At the heart of the unhealed mother wound lies a profound void, a sense of disconnection from the feminine principle or the Great Mother. Individuals may feel spiritually orphaned, perpetually searching for something indefinable. They might pursue approval, success, or ecstatic experiences, but none bring lasting satisfaction. Jung saw this as the soul's deep hunger for reconnection with the archetypal mother, the lost source of life, wisdom, and inner belonging. Final reflection. The source emphasizes that the symptoms of the mother wound are not signs of personal weakness. They are messages, cries from the soul indicating something essential has been lost, ignored, or buried. Jung's teaching was not about blaming mothers, but about empowering individuals to retrieve our projections, to face what we have exiled, and to reclaim ourselves. Healing is not about erasing the past, but about learning how to hold it without being held hostage by it. The idea that the unconscious directs life, if not made conscious, is not a metaphor in the realm of the mother wound. It is a map, and the path begins not with blame, but with awareness, and not with rebellion, but with reclamation. The healing process starts when the child who was never seen consciously chooses to see themselves as an adult, and it is there that freedom is born. The alchemy of the shadow. Mother within the sacred structure of Jungian depth psychology, the confrontation with the shadow mother is not merely therapeutic. It is a soul-deep initiation. Carl Jung did not consider this encounter optional for those who seek wholeness. He considered it vital. Healing the mother wound is not achieved through intellectual insight alone, nor through polite forgiveness offered from the surface of the ego. It demands a raw, symbolic descent into the underworld of the psyche, a reckoning with the archetypal mother's shadow, an encounter as ancient as myth and as intimate as your own heartbeat. The alchemy of the shadow mother. In the symbolic language of alchemy, the negredo, the blackening, marks the first stage of transformation. It is the death of illusion. For the child trapped in the mother complex, this is the moment when the sweet veil of the idealized mother dissolves, and what emerges is something darker, the devouring aspect of the archetypal feminine. Jung taught that this darkness is not evil, it is sacred. It contains the lost fire of the self, the freedom, creativity, and power. The shadow mother in all her terror holds the very ingredients for these things. She is the gatekeeper of a treasure buried in fear. The act of seeing. The first step toward integration. Individuation begins the moment you dare to see her. To see the shadow mother clearly, without idealization or denial, is the soul's first act of rebellion and reclamation. It requires the courage to recognize her manipulations, her fear of abandonment, her need to possess or control, and the way she projected her pain onto the child. As long as we preserve the fantasy of the ever-giving, ever-sacrificing good mother, we remain bound in the psyche's childhood, unable to step into the sacred authority of the adult self. Facing the child's raging grief, buried beneath obedience lies rage, and beneath that rage, grief. Jung emphasized that these emotions are not pathologies. They are sacred energies, fragments of the soul exiled in guilt and fear. To heal, one must acknowledge the fury of betrayal, the ache of not being seen, the sorrow for a mother who could not nurture as the soul required. This grief is not regression, it is resurrection. Through expression, through ritual, art, or even silent tears, we make space for the soul's return. Active imagination. Dialoguing with the shadow mother, Jung's method of active imagination, is a bridge between the conscious mind and the autonomous figures of the unconscious. Through it, we enter into living dialogue with the shadow mother, not to battle her, but to hear her voice. She may reveal fear, jealousy, sorrow, or loss. And through this conversation, the ego transforms, no longer a child craving approval, but an adult capable of listening, speaking, and standing with inner sovereignty. The false split of all good or all bad dissolves. Wholeness begins. The symbolic death of the mother's tyranny. This confrontation marks a death, not of the physical mother, but of the psychic prison she may still represent. Nightmares, emotional storms, and crumbling beliefs often accompany this symbolic death. But in Jung's mythopoetic lens, this death is sacred. It mirrors the myth of the hero descending into the underworld to face the dragon, the mother shadow, and rising reborn. What dies is not the mother but the ego's illusion. What is born is the soul's freedom. The return of the rejected feminine. The shadow mother does not only wound the heart, she wounds the feminine within: intuition, softness, joy, sensuality, receptivity. When we fear the mother, we fear these parts in ourselves. But integration brings reunion. We begin to trust the inner, knowing we once silenced. We express emotion without shame. We create, feel, and love not as a child needing permission, but as a soul remembering its right to exist. Jung saw this as essential healing, especially in cultures that repress the feminine archetype. Rituals of transformation and liberation. Transformation must be marked. The psyche needs ritual. Symbolic acts, writing unsent letters, burning them in ceremony, creating art, declaring sovereignty in sacred space, signal to the unconscious that something has shifted. Jung believed that rituals serve as thresholds. They mark the death of the old self and the birth of the individuated one. They whisper to the shadow mother, "Your reign is over. I honor you, but I no longer belong to you." The emergence of compassion. Seeing the mother as human. When the work is done, something remarkable happens. The mother, internal or external, is no longer a goddess or a monster. She becomes human. Wounded, yes. Flawed, yes. But human. Jung taught that true compassion emerges not from obligation, but from insight. This compassion does not excuse the harm. It frees the heart from bitterness. It allows the soul to breathe again, unchained from resentment and reconnected to the river of life. Final reflection. To face the shadow mother is to descend into the cave where your fear and freedom dwell side by side. It is not an act of violence, it is an act of devotion to your truth, to your soul, to life itself. Jung called this journey individuation, the becoming of the whole self. It begins with a rupture, passes through grief, and culminates in rebirth. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, Jung wrote. But beyond the pain is your freedom, the freedom to live not in reaction to the past, but in service to the self. The freedom to love not from lack, but from fullness. The freedom to die not as someone's child, but as your own sovereign soul. Forgiveness and final rebirth. In the sacred language of Jungian psychology, forgiveness is not the crown of healing. Instead, it may quietly follow the deeper light of inner transformation. Carl Jung did not place forgiveness at the center of the individuation process. He understood that authentic healing does not begin with moral obligation or social performance. Instead, he taught that the true path starts with something far more difficult: the descent inward to face, without flinching, the full reality of the wound, especially when it was inflicted by the hands meant to hold us. If forgiveness ever arises, Jung insisted, it must not be manufactured. It is not a ceremony for others, nor a badge of spiritual superiority. Instead, it is the quiet, unforced consequence of soul retrieval. This happens at the moment when the individual has reclaimed their psychic authority and no longer requires external resolution to be whole. Forgiveness, if it appears, is a byproduct of integration, not a prerequisite for liberation. Jung cautioned that premature forgiveness often becomes a psychological bypass. He saw it as a sedative offered in place of inner fire. We are often taught, especially in spiritual and religious systems, that forgiveness equates to virtue. However, when forgiveness is offered too quickly, emerging from guilt, religious duty, or the fear of being seen as unhealed, it becomes yet another mask worn over unacknowledged rage, sorrow, and betrayal. In this form, forgiveness serves the mother complex. It is not liberation, but suppression. Before true healing can take root, something more raw must be honored. This includes the voice that was silenced, the anger that was shamed, and the grief that was denied. It is the child within who waited and was never seen. Jung believed that to feel these truths is not regression, but revolution. The individual must grieve the mother they never had, rage against the control that suffocated their becoming, and mourn the years sacrificed in loyalty to an illusion. This is not an attack on the mother. It is the emancipation of the soul. Healing begins when the mother is no longer frozen in myth, neither angel nor monster, but seen clearly as she was and is, a fallible, wounded human being. This act of humanization collapses the projections that once inflated her power and dismantles the psychic structures that kept the self imprisoned. In this space of clarity, after the storm and the rupture, the possibility of forgiveness may emerge. But even then, it must come not from obligation, but from the rootedness of a sovereign heart. Crucially, Jung insisted that, even in the absence of forgiveness, freedom is possible. Forgiveness is not required for liberation. What is required is integration. The individual must gather the pieces of their soul, long exiled voice, feeling, rage, softness, and bring them back into conscious life. They must draw boundaries not to punish the mother, but to reclaim the inner landscape once ruled by her image. The goal is not reconciliation, it is individuation. And when the individual walks that path, the inherited scripts of guilt and identification begin to dissolve. In Jungian psychology, forgiveness is not the finish line. It is a leaf that may fall once the roots of the self have grown deep. The true journey is not toward reconciliation, but toward restoration of inner authority. It is the quiet revolution of no longer editing your truth to earn love, no longer muting your instincts to preserve connection, and no longer shrinking to maintain the illusion of peace. As Jung wrote, only the man who can consciously assent to the power of the shadow within himself can overcome it. In the realm of the mother complex, this means no longer waiting for forgiveness to set you free. It means you rise, you reclaim, you choose to free yourself. Not later, not when it's safe, but now. In the realm of Jungian depth psychology, the healing of the mother wound is not the culmination. It is the sacred crossing into a new life. It marks not merely the resolution of pain, but the symbolic death of the self who was shaped by survival, silence, and inherited sorrow. And in that death, a rebirth begins, one no longer tethered to ancestral roles or invisible loyalties, but grounded in the sovereignty of the authentic self. Jung taught that only through conscious confrontation, mourning, and inner integration of the mother complex can we take our first true steps into psychological wholeness. This is no ordinary healing, it is metamorphosis of the soul. The dissolution of the false self. As the grip of the mother complex loosens, the scaffolding of ego built upon pleasing, performing, and preserving the family myth begins to fracture. Jung warned that this unraveling often arrives cloaked in crisis, an identity collapse where former values seem hollow, direction disappears, and the center no longer holds. But this sacred disorientation is the nigredo of the alchemical journey, the blackening phase in which the old must dissolve to make way for the gold hidden beneath. The ascent of the sovereign self. In the void left behind, something deeper stirs, the ascent of the sovereign self. What emerges from this psychic underworld is not the child returned, but the adult born anew, no longer orbiting the mother's imagined gaze. This self is guided not by guilt or longing, but by inner alignment. This reborn individual no longer seeks rescue or validation. They parent themselves. They choose presence over performance, and they begin to walk not with apology, but with quiet authority. Jung named this the awakening of the sovereign, the self that lives from its own center. The rewriting of the inner myth. The transformation of identity requires the unraveling of an inherited script. The old narrative, I must sacrifice myself to be worthy, I am never enough unless I earn it, must be unbound from the psyche. In its place, a new myth emerges, one written not in reaction to the mother's pain, but in reverence for one's own truth. Jung considered this inner revision a sacred rite, the individual stepping out of a family tragedy and becoming the author of a new symbolic life. The sacred boundaries of individuation. With this emergence comes the necessity of boundary, not to punish but to protect. The external mother, if still present, must be met with clarity. The internal mother, her voice of shame, fear, or guilt, must be recognized and gently disempowered. Jung emphasized that boundaries are not severances of love, but declarations of selfhood. They are the psychic lines that guard the adult from regression and honor the hard-earned terrain of the self. The reclamation of the inner mother. A profound shift occurs when the need for external nurturance is withdrawn and rerouted inward. Here, the archetypal inner mother is reclaimed not as the voice of judgment, but as the whisper of intuition, softness, and care. Self-parenting becomes a living ritual. Rest becomes sacred. Emotion is honored without apology. Jung understood this as the reintegration of the feminine principle, where being is no longer seen as weakness, but as wisdom in motion. The rebirth of creative life. Once freed from the mother's unconscious dominion, the soul begins to flower again. The creative force, long paralyzed by fear of rejection, begins to move. It may come as words, visions, touch, or movement. Jung believed this creative renewal was not decoration, but evidence that individuation is taking root. For to create is to claim authorship of your life, to act not from wounding, but from wonder. Returning whole to the world. Jung taught that individuation is never self-centered. It prepares the individual to return to the collective, not as a fractured child seeking healing from others, but as an adult who can offer presence, wisdom, and love. Relationships transform. They are no longer reenactments of loss, but vessels of reciprocity. Purpose becomes a channel not for approval, but for contribution. This is the matured self standing in the world without shame, breaking the spell for future generations. Perhaps most miraculously, Jung saw the healing of the mother wound as a transgenerational act. To confront and integrate it is to interrupt the ancestral pattern. No longer is the mother's pain unconsciously passed on. Instead, the healed individual becomes a conscious ancestor, one who returns not to rescue the mother, but to redeem the line. This is the deeper offering, to be the one who ends the spell and births a new legacy of wholeness, creativity, and freedom. Final reflection. Rebirth in Jungian. Psychology is not about becoming who you were before the pain. It is about awakening to the truth of who you were always meant to be. It is the quiet rebellion against inherited guilt, unconscious loyalties, and familial shadow. It is the radical act of taking the pen back into your own hands. As Jung so powerfully wrote, your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams? Who looks inside awakes? And in the aftermath of the mother wound, awakening means this: no one else is coming to rewrite your story, because now you are the author and the page before you is blank. If something within this message stirred you, if even a single word mirrored your inner experience, I invite you to let your voice be heard in the comments. Have you encountered that soul whose presence feels like home, or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become the lantern in someone else's darkness, the very sign they didn't know they were searching for. And if someone close to you is silently struggling with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace, share this message with them. Help me reach the ones who need to remember real love does not demand that we shrink. True connection does not ask for sacrifice of the soul. And the most vital union we will ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here in this space, we journey beneath the surface of things, exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship is but a mirror reflecting our personal evolution. If there's a theme, a question, or a wound you would like us to explore in future discussions, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it is essential. Thank you for showing up not just to this message, but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember this: when the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. But until that moment, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation. That is the home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born. Until next time, I'll see you on the path.